She wrinkled her nose at the skillet. Grease popped. Beans bubbled. A thin cut of meat sizzled on an open flame. "Is that dinner?" she asked, her tone hovering between disbelief and mockery. The American cowboy, sunburned, sweat-lined, and wearing a crooked grin, shrugged. "Ain't much, but it fills the belly." The other Japanese women POWs behind her giggled quietly. The girl, a former field medic, barely 22, had spent the last 3 years surviving off moldy rice balls and tree bark soup. And still, somehow, this seemed crude. She expected revulsion. What she got was reverence. He served it to her on a tin plate: beans, cornbread, a strip of crisp meat, and something sweet she couldn't name. She took one bite, and everything inside her stilled: the salt, the fire, the honey. Her fingers trembled. This wasn't just food. This was memory. This was her undoing. And it began, absurdly, with a cowboy's laugh and a pan of beans by the fire. Reiko had not expected the camp to smell like horses. Dust, sweat, leather, and sunburned hay filled her nostrils as she stepped off the truck and into the red dirt of the Texas plains. Her boots, a size too big, scuffed the ground as she was ushered into line with the others. Young Japanese women, silent, uniformed, eyes hollow from a war that had taken too much. The sun pressed against their backs like an iron. In the distance, cows shifted lazily in the heat, their tails flicking without urgency. It didn't look like a prison. There were no barking dogs, no iron gates, just fences, weather-worn barns, and a handful of men with rifles slung low and cigarettes clinging to their lips. The man who watched her the longest had dirt on his jeans, a banjo slung behind his back, and a face too sun-cracked to guess his age. He chewed something, probably tobacco, and when Reiko met his gaze, he didn't glare or smirk. He just tipped his hat and turned back to the fire pit where a skillet hissed with something she didn't recognize. She squinted at it. Beans, maybe? Grease. Something fatty. "Dinner," one of the guards muttered to the group. "Cowboy style." Reiko scoffed under her breath. The corner of her mouth curled just slightly, the closest she'd come to a smile in months. But it wasn't from amusement. It was condescension. Primitive, she thought. These Americans couldn't even build proper kitchens. They cooked on open flames like peasants. One of the girls beside her whispered in Japanese, "Do you think they know how to use a knife?" Reiko didn't answer, but her silence was loud. It meant, these men don't cook, they burn things. The cowboy flipped a slab of meat with a rusted spatula. The smell was strong: salt, smoke, maybe pork. He whistled as he worked, unbothered by the eyes watching him. When he glanced up and caught her expression, he paused just for a second. Not hurt, not angry, but there was something else in his face, a quiet, flickering awareness, like he knew he was being judged and had long ago stopped caring. She was handed a tin plate, and with it the insult of the meal: a scoop of thick beans, a piece of cornbread, and a slice of something too greasy to name. She held the plate like it might bite her. The heat from it seeped into her palms. Around her, the other women looked uncertain. Some whispered. Others stared at the food with suspicion. No one moved. She looked up at the cowboy. He nodded once. "Go on," he said, slow and easy, as if she were a guest in his home and not a prisoner behind barbed wire. She tilted her chin. "This is what you feed yourselves?" she asked. Her English was halting but sharp. He shrugged. "Better than bark soup, ain't it?" The joke stung. Not because it was cruel, but because it was close to something true. Her pride bristled. She lowered her eyes and took a bite anyway, quick, defiant. And then she froze. The salt hit first, then the sweetness of the molasses in the bread, then the meat, tough, yes, but rich with fat and char and something like smoke-wrapped comfort. Her body reacted before her mind did. Her stomach clenched, her tongue tingled. A sound caught in her throat, not a gasp, but something smaller, a memory trying to surface. She swallowed, slowly, too slowly. The cowboy was already walking away. She looked down at the plate, then back up at the man tending the fire. The flames licked the edges of the skillet. Embers floated like fireflies into the twilight. He said nothing more. Reiko turned away, plate in hand, jaw tight. The meal was plain, rough, but something inside her had shifted. She would not speak of it. Not yet, not to anyone. But that night she finished every bite. She lay on her cot, the thin army blanket pulled to her chin, and felt the weight of it all settle not in her stomach, but somewhere deeper. The food warmed her from the inside out, yet it stirred something raw. Her mind drifted, not to the fire-lit barn or the murmurs of sleeping prisoners, but to another kind of hunger, the kind that didn't end with stew. Nagano, 2 winters ago. Her mother crouched by the rusted stove, scraping the last layer of blackened rice from the bottom of an iron pot. The air in the house had been thick with smoke and hopelessness. Outside, the snow fell in silence. Inside, the silence was heavier. There had been no fish that day, no eggs, just dried roots, crushed leaves, and a spoonful of powdered sardine bones meant to stretch the meal across 3 mouths. Her mother didn't eat. She had claimed she already had her portion. Reiko had believed that lie until the 3rd time she saw her mother wipe invisible rice from her lips. Her brother Haruki had already gone to war. He left wearing a patched-up uniform and the face of someone trying too hard to look like a man. He was 17. The government sent letters afterward, short, cold ones. His unit has been reassigned. No news is good news. Victory requires sacrifice. She stopped reading them after the 4th. Back then, Reiko had learned that hunger was not always a gnawing in the belly. Sometimes it was the sound of paper-thin walls between neighbors whispering at night, wondering if the Americans would bomb again tomorrow. Sometimes it was the feeling of shame when your neighbor's daughter fainted from hunger in the street and your mother gave her half a rice ball you were saving for yourself. Reiko had said nothing. She'd just walked away, cheeks burning. Later that night, she'd cried behind the water barrel, not for the food, but because she hated the pride that made her angry in that moment. In the hospital where she was stationed near the end of the war, food came in buckets, thin porridge, sometimes stained pink with blood from bandages washed in the same pots. There were no seconds, no questions, just chewing and silence. The nurses were stern and hollow-eyed. They moved like ghosts. Sometimes a soldier would cry out from a fever, and one of the girls would be forced to hold him down while he thrashed. Afterward, someone always whispered the same line, "At least he doesn't need to eat anymore." Reiko had learned to chew slowly, to make each spoonful last. She once tried to make her own miso by grinding moldy soybeans under her bunk. It gave her food poisoning for 3 days. But she survived it. She always survived, even when surviving felt like failure. Food was never comfort. It was never joy. It was ration cards, powdered seaweed, and scorched fingers from touching too hot pots when you were too impatient to wait. Food was shame. It was choosing between feeding your mother or saving your strength for the morning's march. It was being told that to want more was weakness, and to accept food from the enemy was treason. And now, here in this barn, a stranger with straw in his hair and dirt on his hands had offered her something that tasted like safety, not victory, not indulgence, just warmth. She turned onto her side and stared at the wooden slats of the wall. Her fingers curled around the edge of the blanket, not out of cold, but instinct, to hold something, to keep something. Tomorrow they would feed her again, and her body would remember before her pride could protest. The next evening, Reiko stood near the edge of the corral, arms folded tightly across her chest, pretending not to watch. But her eyes followed every motion of the cowboy at the fire. He crouched low beside the cast-iron skillet, poking at it with a flat wooden spoon. The flames danced in the dry dusk air, flickering orange against the darkening sky. Sparks leapt like insects into the wind. He hummed as he stirred, a lazy, winding tune that drifted between the notes of an old American song. She didn't know the melody, but it was soft, non-threatening, almost warm. No one shouted, no one barked orders. One of the guards leaned on a post, chuckling at something the cowboy said, tipping his hat back like it weighed too much. Another man played a harmonica from a bench near the barn, slow, uneven notes at first, then something vaguely like music. It wasn't a military march. It was a lullaby, a song for no one, a tune with no enemy. Reiko stood still. She had spent years associating fire with danger. In her village, fire meant bombs. Fire meant rooftops caving in and people running with their hair alight. In the hospital tents, it meant cauterized wounds and stoves burning too low to heat the broth. Fire had always been cruel, but not this fire. This fire cooked beans. The cowboy wore the same shirt as yesterday, rolled up at the sleeves, buttons undone at the collar. His arms were sun-browned, scarred in places and corded with lean muscle, but there was no tension in him, no threat. He moved like someone who knew the world didn't need conquering, just tending. His rifle was nowhere in sight. She was handed another plate. This time she didn't sneer. She didn't speak. The food looked the same, simple, a slice of cornbread again, beans that glistened with grease, a strip of pork that curled at the edge. But something was different, and it wasn't on the plate. It was in her hands. They didn't shake this time. She sat on a wooden crate near the barn, not too close to the others, not too far. The wind carried the scent of the stew toward her, and before she could stop herself, she was swallowing. Her body, again, moved before her pride. The first bite was quiet. No fireworks, no tremble, just warmth spreading across her tongue like sunlight on a cold floor. Her mouth remembered how to chew slowly, to savor. She looked up and found herself staring at the cowboy across the fire. He was talking to another guard now, gesturing with the spoon, still smiling. She hadn't expected smiles. She'd expected teeth, orders, maybe even fists. Instead, she was handed a fork. The moment caught her off guard more than anything else. She had eaten from bowls, cups, her hands, but not a fork. Not here, not now. The metal felt foreign. It clinked against her plate softly, like a sound from another lifetime. She thought of her mother's utensils, melted in the bombings. She thought of a time before the war, when meals had been shared and not counted. The fire cracked behind her. The harmonica trailed off. She took another bite. No one told her to be grateful. No one punished her for eating too fast. The cowboy didn't even glance her way again. And somehow that stung more. He had offered her food, not for praise or thanks, but simply because it was there, because she was hungry, because she was human. She chewed slowly. Her eyes burned. No one noticed. And for the first time since she arrived, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like a guest, but she couldn't say it, wouldn't even allow herself to think it for long. Each time the thought crept in, that she was safe here, that they were feeding her out of something like decency, she would shove it down like a bone stuck in her throat. She'd been raised to believe that comfort was weakness, and that accepting kindness from the enemy was the first step toward disgrace. And yet, each night, she ate, slowly, secretly, completely. The food was never extravagant. Beans, cornbread, stewed greens, pork, if they were lucky. But something about the repetition softened her edges. Her body stopped bracing for poison. Her shoulders began to drop during meals. She no longer inspected the food before the first bite. The chewing came easier. The swallowing felt less like shame. She still made a point of looking unimpressed. She rarely spoke during meals. When the other girls muttered in Japanese or dared to giggle, she stayed silent, eyes on her plate. Her dignity had been the only thing she could bring from home, and she wore it like armor. But the cracks were there. Then came the day he added the molasses. It was a quiet afternoon, the sky pale and soft above the ranch. She could smell the bread before she saw it, sweet and heavy, sticky in the air. The cowboy, same sweat-dark hat pulled low over his brow, cut thick slices from a blackened skillet and set them on trays. When she reached the front of the line, he gave her a half-smile and said nothing, just nodded to her plate. She took the cornbread without a word. Back at the crate she used as a table, she sat alone. She tore off a piece. It stuck slightly to her fingers. The texture was different, denser, darker. She frowned. Then she tasted it. The sweetness hit like a match to dry paper. Her jaw froze mid-chew. It was wrong, utterly, impossibly wrong. This couldn't be right. Not here, not now. But the taste. It was her grandmother's tea cake, the one made only once a year before the war, when sugar was still a thing people had. The black syrup had been made from boiled sugar cane and patience. Her grandmother used to serve it with warm barley tea on spring mornings, the paper doors open to let in the breeze. Reiko had been a child then, maybe 7. She remembered sitting on a stool too small for her knees, watching the old woman pour batter into iron molds. Her hair had smelled like smoke and plum vinegar. She blinked now, swallowing hard. The flavor vanished, but the memory didn't. Around her the camp hummed quietly. A horse stamped somewhere out of view. A harmonica hit a clumsy note and then fell silent. She stared at the half-eaten bread in her hand, torn between longing and fury. How dare something so simple take her back to a time before the world had broken? How dare this cowboy, with his cracked boots and soot-stained hands, remind her of something so tender? She looked up. He was leaning against the fence now, arms folded, watching the horizon. He didn't look at her. Didn't need to. She knew he had noticed, not her tears, because she hadn't let them fall, but the stillness, the way she had stopped eating for a moment too long, the way the bread hadn't hit the ground. He didn't speak. He just stayed where he was. And somehow that silence, his refusal to intrude, felt more like respect than words ever could. She wiped her fingers on her pants and finished the rest of the cornbread. No crumbs left, no hesitation. Her pride would survive another day. But something else, quiet and small, had already begun to surrender. The next morning, the cowboy asked her if she wanted to learn how to cook it. She didn't understand him at first. He pointed to the skillet, then mimed flipping something with exaggerated movements, his eyebrows lifted like it was a joke. She blinked at him, confused, arms crossed tight across her chest. The other girls were headed toward the laundry detail or the chicken coops. This wasn't part of her assigned task. She narrowed her eyes. "No," she said flatly, her accent thick. He grinned. "Suit yourself." She turned away before he could see the way her lips pressed together, not in defiance, but in indecision. But the next day, he asked again. This time she didn't say no. She didn't say anything. She just stood beside him while he poured oil into the skillet and dropped in a few thick-cut strips of bacon. The sound was immediate, hissing, spitting, popping like firecrackers. She flinched. He didn't. He just held the pan steady and let the scent bloom into the morning air, salt, grease, wood smoke. She watched him closely, unsure of what she was supposed to do. He handed her the spatula. Slowly. No flourish. She hesitated, then took it. The first attempt was clumsy. She tore the bacon, burned the edge, let the fat jump too high and nearly drop onto her wrist. He didn't laugh, didn't comment, just leaned against the table chewing on a toothpick and said, "Ain't no hurry." She muttered under her breath in Japanese, something about this being stupid, unnecessary, a waste of time. But still, she flipped the next piece. And the next. He handed her an onion. She frowned at it. He made a cutting motion, then set the knife down and stepped back, watching. Her hands, more used to bandages and folded sheets, gripped the knife with awkward determination. The first slice was too thick, the second better. By the fourth, the layers fell apart like paper fans. He didn't correct her, didn't hover. The silence between them grew strangely comfortable. She stirred the beans next, the scent catching in her throat, molasses, pork fat, pepper. It was such a simple act, stirring. But her hand found rhythm. Her eyes followed the swirl of brown against brown. She caught herself leaning closer to inhale. This wasn't just food anymore. This was something else, a ritual, a rhythm, a kind of remembering. She thought of her mother's hands making miso, her grandmother rinsing rice 3 times before cooking. She thought of Haruki holding a fish over a fire when they were children, the way fire turned survival into ceremony. Now she was here, stirring an American pot over an American flame with a man who said little and demanded even less. It was absurd and real. When the beans were done, he dipped a spoon in, blew on it, then offered it to her. Not as a test, not with expectation, just as a gesture. She took it, tasted, said nothing. He nodded once. "Good." She didn't smile, but something in her posture softened. They cooked again the next day, and the next. Sometimes he played the harmonica while she stirred. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. She began arriving early, without being asked. One morning he handed her the salt without a word, and she seasoned the pan like she had been doing it all her life. He never told her she was doing it wrong. That, more than anything, made her stay. Because in that silence, between bacon grease and simmering beans, between smoke and steel, she found something she hadn't known she missed: respect, without conditions, without commands, just passed like a spoon across fire. The day she was handed the paper, she almost laughed. A worn sheet yellowed at the corners and a pencil already dulled from use. A guard dropped it on the table with a shrug. "You can write home," he said. "1 page. Keep it clean." Reiko stared at the page as if it were a trap. Home. That word had too many meanings now, too many ghosts. Did home still exist? Was her village still standing? Was her mother alive? She hadn't heard anything in over a year. There'd been no letters since she'd been captured, no confirmation that Haruki had survived, only silence. And now they wanted her to break it, with a single sheet of paper. She sat for nearly an hour before touching the pencil. It rolled toward her fingers like it was daring her to pick it up. When she did, the weight of it felt unfamiliar, foreign. What was there to say? "Dear Mother," she began. The words came slowly, like walking barefoot over stones. She started with safe things: the weather, the daily chores, the girls she bunked with, all the things she imagined the guards would allow. But then, as the pencil moved and the memories softened, her hand betrayed her. "The food is strange. It makes me feel things I do not understand." She froze after that line. She could have erased it, should have, but she didn't. She continued. She wrote about the cornbread, about the sweet molasses, about stirring beans and flipping bacon and standing beside a fire that did not burn her. She wrote about the man who never asked her to smile, who let her fail and try again, about how silence here was not fear, but space. Then she wrote what surprised her most. "I do not hate them, Mother." The pencil paused again. "I try to, but I do not." She knew it wouldn't pass inspection, knew the camp staff would copy her letter, stamp it, and forward it through military channels. Somewhere along the way, a Japanese censor, stationed in Manchuria or Tokyo, would read the line and mark it unsent. The paper might be shredded, burned, buried in some drawer labeled compromised morale. But it didn't matter, because she had written it, and writing it had changed something. There was power in seeing the words take shape. Her feelings, jumbled and quiet, had now lived in ink. She hadn't spoken them aloud, not to the other girls, not even to herself in the dark, but now they sat plainly on the page, not as betrayal, but as truth. She didn't need a reply. She didn't need her mother to read it. She just needed to remember what it felt like to be honest. When she handed the letter to the guard, he barely glanced at it, just tossed it onto a growing pile and waved her off. She watched the stack of envelopes, some sealed, some still drying, sitting like fragile bones waiting for a wind that might never come. Later that night, she cooked again. This time, she added the salt herself without being asked. The cowboy noticed, nodded, said nothing. Her hands moved with ease, her shoulders no longer hunched. She stirred as if the pot were a drum, beating out rhythm, memory, confession, because the words she could not send, the ones they'd never allow, had already been freed, in fire, in flavor, and now in ink. That evening, the sky bled into a soft lavender over the Texas plain. The fire crackled low, shadows stretching long across the dirt. Reiko stood beside the cowboy, sleeves rolled up, apron streaked with flour and grease. The smell rising from the pot was thick, chicken thighs, skin on, simmering in a broth of carrots and celery, fat shimmering on the surface. He stirred it slowly, humming that same wandering tune she never could place. She sniffed the air and frowned. "Too much salt," she muttered. He didn't miss a beat. "You think so?" She folded her arms. "Also, not enough depth. You boil it too fast. Makes the meat dry." He looked at her amused. "Oh, I see. So now you're an expert?" She narrowed her eyes. "I know chicken." He chuckled, wiped his hands on a rag, and, without another word, handed her the ladle. "You try." It wasn't a challenge, it wasn't mockery, just 3 words spoken like an invitation. She hesitated. Her fingers brushed the warm wood of the spoon, then took it fully. The others were watching now. One of the girls smirked. A guard paused mid-step, but Reiko stepped forward, her mind already scanning the memory of her mother's miso broth, the way her grandmother used to scold her for adding too much daikon. She tasted the broth again, let it sit on her tongue. Then she moved. More onions, a dash of vinegar from the metal shelf, a pinch of crushed pepper she found at the back of the supply box. She turned down the fire, letting the pot breathe, letting the flavor build. The cowboy didn't interrupt, just leaned against the post and watched. After 20 minutes, she served it. The first bite was cautious. The girls looked to each other, then down at their plates. The cowboy tasted it last, letting the steam roll up into his face. "Well," he said, lips smacking slightly, "ain't that something?" She waited for more, a critique, a jab, a correction. It never came. Later that night, when most had wandered to their bunks and the fire was down to glowing coals, he sat beside her near the fence. "You know," he said, "taste don't lie." She looked at him. He smiled, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. "You liked the stew. My stew, even if it was too salty." She didn't answer at first. Then she let out a breath. "It wasn't bad," he laughed. "High praise from the lady who nearly declared war over a chicken bone." She smiled despite herself. The stars were out now, thick and unbothered by war. The ranch was quiet, just the rustle of grass, the distant shuffle of horses. She glanced at the pot still resting near the ashes, steam curling like a ribbon into the night air. They'd argued, yes, but it hadn't hurt. It hadn't been a fight for power, just a difference in flavor, a clash of kitchens, and instead of punishment, there had been a pot passed between them. Instead of orders, a smile. This, she realized, was strength too, the kind that didn't bruise, the kind that didn't shout. They didn't talk much more after that, but something had shifted. Not peace, not forgiveness, but maybe something smaller, something just as rare. Permission. To disagree and still be fed, to argue and still be seen, to boil bones and build something better, together. They knew the end was near. Repatriation orders had come quietly, posted in the main hall next to the peeling calendar and ration logs. Her name was near the bottom of the list. A ship would take her back to ruins, to memory, to whatever waited in the shell of a country still learning how to breathe again. She told no one how she felt, not even herself. That evening she found the fire already lit. The cowboy had set things differently. 2 crates pulled close, covered with a worn sheet that might have once been white. A pair of tin plates polished clean, forks aligned. And in the middle, the strangest thing of all, 2 candles stuck into empty bean cans, flickering against the wind. She stared, stunned. It wasn't fancy, but it was deliberate. A meal prepared not out of duty, but attention. "Sit," he said, gesturing with a nod, "before the wind eats the candles." She sat. He served without words. A thick steak, seared and glistening. Beans, simmered low with bacon. Molasses cornbread, warm and wrapped in cloth. And something else, a small glass bottle, amber liquid inside. He poured it carefully, handing her a tin cup. They toasted with nothing but their eyes. The first bite of steak nearly undid her. Tender, smoky, impossibly rich. The kind of food reserved for weddings, for celebrations, for dreams. She chewed slowly, watching his face as he watched the stars. There was no music tonight, just the crickets, the crackle of flame, and the quiet reverence of 2 people who knew this was the last time. After a while she said it. "I used to think you were primitive." He didn't flinch. He just shrugged. "I still am." They both laughed. It wasn't loud, but it was real. The candles danced. She took another sip of the amber drink, something sharp, something that made her cheeks flush and her chest ache. She had no words for what it was, only what it did. Then, softly, she added, "This is the best meal of my life." He looked at her, then, not with surprise, but with understanding. He didn't say thank you, didn't make it a moment, just smiled, That smile, the same crooked half-smile he gave when her cornbread didn't rise, or when she dropped the onions, or when she added too much vinegar and made the beans almost sour. That same smile now told her something more. You mattered here, not as a prisoner, not as an enemy, as a person. She blinked quickly and looked down at her plate. The steak was gone. The bread, too. Only a streak of beans left at the rim. She'd eaten slowly, trying to make it last. But nothing could stretch time thin enough. The wind blew, snuffing out one candle. He stood, began to gather the dishes. She stopped him. "Let it be," she said. "Just let it sit a little longer." He nodded, and so they sat, in silence, surrounded by stars and firelight and the smell of meals they would never share again. Tomorrow she would board a truck, then a train, then a ship. Tomorrow she would go back. But tonight there was peace, not in treaties, not in headlines, in steak, in cornbread, in laughter that did not require translation. If you're enjoying this story, give it a like and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The morning came without ceremony. No bugle, no announcement. Just the pale wash of dawn sliding over the camp and the soft sounds of boots on gravel as men and women began to move with quiet purpose. The air carried that familiar mix of dust and smoke and something else. Finality. Reiko rose before the others, dressed in the same borrowed clothes she had worn since arriving, her movements careful, deliberate, as though she were afraid of breaking the moment if she moved too quickly. The fire pit was cold, the skillet scrubbed clean. The bench where she had sat so many evenings now held nothing but a folded apron. She picked it up slowly. The fabric was stiff from countless washings, faded almost to gray. A faint grease stain marked the corner where she had once wiped her hands without thinking. It smelled faintly of smoke and salt, and something that reminded her of mornings that no longer existed. She folded it the way she'd seen him do, once lengthwise, then again, smoothing the creases with her palm as if calming an animal. When she was finished, she placed it on the bench where he would find it. She didn't leave a note. She didn't need to. When she turned, the camp was already stirring. A truck idled near the fence, canvas flapping in the breeze. Other women stood nearby, clutching bundles, some speaking softly, others staring straight ahead. Reiko walked to the line and climbed into the back without looking back. But she felt him there. She felt the way one senses heat even with eyes closed, the weight of his presence, steady and unremarkable, like the ground beneath her feet. She did not turn. She didn't want the moment to fracture into something that needed words. The truck jolted forward. Only then did she open her coat pocket. Inside was a small tin, its lid dented, the label smudged from handling. She turned it in her hands. The scent reached her before she opened it. Smoke, salt, a whisper of sweetness. The spice mix he used, the one he'd said was nothing special. The one she had learned was everything. She pressed it briefly to her chest. As the truck rolled on, the camp receded behind her, shrinking into dust and memory. The fence, the barn, the place where she had learned that food could be more than survival. It could be language. She would carry that knowledge home. Weeks later, when the ship docked and she stepped onto unfamiliar soil once again, she was thinner than she had been in years past, but stronger. Her hands were steady, her eyes clearer. She carried no luggage, only a small bundle and the tin wrapped carefully in cloth. The world she returned to was broken, streets collapsed, faces hollow, but she knew how to feed herself now, not just with food, but with patience, with memory, with the understanding that care could exist even in the wreckage. She never spoke of the cowboy by name, but sometimes, when she cooked for the women in her neighborhood, she would add a pinch of salt at the end. Not because the recipe required it, but because it felt right, because it reminded her that dignity could live in the smallest gestures, that kindness could arrive unannounced, that a single shared meal could cross borders no weapon ever could. And somewhere far away, under a different sky, a man would unfold an apron and wonder, briefly, if the girl with the steady hands ever remembered the taste of that first meal. He hoped she did, because it meant something. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft knock of wood against wood as Reiko chopped vegetables on the old cutting board. Outside, cicadas hummed in the late afternoon heat, and sunlight spilled through the narrow window, catching dust in its slow, patient fall. The house smelled of oil and grain and something sweet beneath it all, familiar, comforting. Her granddaughter sat at the low table, legs tucked beneath her, watching with wide, curious eyes. She was small, all elbows and concentration, the way children are when they sense something important is happening, but don't yet know what it is. "What are you making, Obasan?" the girl asked. Reiko paused, knife hovering mid-air. She smiled, just a little. "Dinner," she said. "The kind you remember." She worked with careful hands, slower now, but certain. The motions had never left her. Heat the pan. Let it warm. Add oil, but not too much. Let it sing before the food touches it. The smells began to rise. Simple, earthy, honest. Beans, cornbread, a small cut of meat she'd saved for the occasion. Her granddaughter wrinkled her nose. "It smells different." Reiko smiled again. "That's because it is." She poured, stirred, tasted. When the girl reached for the salt, Reiko stopped her gently. "Wait," she said. "Not yet." The girl watched, curious, as her grandmother added a pinch of something from a small tin kept carefully in the cupboard. It was old, dented, its label nearly worn away. Inside was a blend of salt and dried herbs and something smoky that had crossed oceans with her, a thing carried quietly through years of rebuilding. "Now," Reiko said. "Taste." The girl obeyed. Her eyes widened. "It's warm," she said. "It tastes like it's trying to tell me something." Reiko smiled, slow and soft. "Yes," she said, "it is." They ate together at the small table. No ceremony, no hurry, just the sound of chewing, the clink of chopsticks, the comfort of a shared meal. Outside, the evening light shifted, turning gold, then amber, then soft gray. When the bowls were empty, the girl looked up. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Reiko leaned back in her chair. Her hands rested in her lap, folded not in tension, but in peace. "From a man who didn't know he was teaching me," she said. The girl waited, sensing a story. "He lived very far from here," Reiko continued, "and we were supposed to be enemies. He cooked simply. He didn't talk much, but he cooked as if the world could be made right, just for a moment, with heat and patience." She didn't say his name. She never had. Some things were better left unnamed, preserved in the quiet spaces of memory. The girl nodded, satisfied. Outside, a breeze passed through the open window, stirring the curtains. Reiko closed her eyes for a moment and let herself be there again, by the fire, the stars overhead, the sound of a man humming as he stirred a pot, not knowing he was changing the course of someone's life. When she opened her eyes, the room was still. The table was clean, the meal finished. She rose slowly and began to wash the dishes, hands steady, heart full. Somewhere in the world, she imagined, that man might still be cooking, or perhaps he had taught someone else. Perhaps the story had passed on, carried quietly from one table to another, and that was enough. Because not all stories are written in books. Some are carried in the taste of food and remembered. If this story moved you, please like the video and comment where you're watching from. And thank you for remembering history's quietest moments.